A while back, I was asked to do a study of 18 U.S.C. 242, and it's taken a while, but I've finally done it. So we'll ponder that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution, and we teach the rising generation to be free. I am glad you could join me. As always, head over to that website, constitutionstudy.com. So you'll find everything I'm working on. The book is out. It's for sale. You can buy it on Amazon.com. Please consider buying it. It would certainly help me greatly. There's some other things coming out this month. I'm preparing the Constitution Scholar and maybe a couple other things. So good opportunity to sign up for the newsletter. Just click on that newsletter button on the website. I send out a newsletter once a month. I might be announcing a new product or focusing on some article, but I'll let you know what's going on at the Constitution Study, where I'll be speaking when we start doing live in-person events, where I'll be speaking online when those come up. Also, you have the opportunity to hit the checkbox when you sign up for the newsletter and get these posts emailed to you when they come out. That's right. When I post these to the website, I have a system that'll automatically email you a brief summary, and you can click a link and you can go and watch the video or read the article directly. Don't worry about Google or Facebook analytics. Get this delivered directly to your inbox. It's right there when you sign up for the newsletter. And with that, let's talk about 18 U.S. Code 242. Now, 18 U.S.C. 242 is a deprivation of rights under color of law. It is U.S. law. That's what U.S.C., U.S. Code. And it reads, whoever under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom willfully subjects any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or to different punishments, pains, or penalties on account of such person being an alien or by reason of his color or race than are prescribed for the punishment of citizens, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both, and if bodily injury results from the acts committed in the violation of this section, or if such acts include the use, attempted use, or threatened use of a dangerous weapon, explosives, or fire, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. And if death results from the acts committed in violation of this section, or if such acts include kidnapping or any attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse, or any attempt to kill, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for a term of years or for life or both, or may be sentenced to death. Whew. Okay, what is all of that? There's a lot going on there, but it really boils down to something very simple. You see, Congress has the authority to write laws to implement the protections of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the Constitution reads, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Now, what is this protection that this legislation is enforcing? It's turning it into, codifying into law. Well, actually two places. First, we have the Fifth Amendment, which reads, in part, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, that's fairly simple. Basically, it says you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And part of what this is talking about in the depriving of rights under color of law is law enforcement depriving you of rights without actually following, without due process of law. But we've also got the 14th Amendment, Section 1, which reads in part, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of a citizen of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. This is probably the closer point of what 18 U.S.C. 242 is trying to implement, because it focuses on states. It says, listen, if a state or a member state or any other jurisdiction deprives you of rights under color of law, this is what's going to happen. Now, this comes from an errant reading of the Constitution that believes the Bill of Rights only applies to the federal government, and there's a whole other article and video I've done on that. But that's the general purpose of this statute. The idea being of if something is done to you under the color of law. Now, this is kind of an important point nowadays as we're dealing with a lot of infringement on rights under color of law with all of these stay-at-home orders and other infringements on our rights, closing businesses and preventing you from exercising your liberty. But the idea is if you have a right or a privilege that's protected under the Constitution. And I like the way it says protected by the Constitution or the laws of the United States. It's kind of slipped in there, but think about it. We've said, or at least I've said for quite a while, you don't get rights from government. Well, there are certain rights you get from government, but unalienable rights do not come from government. And you don't get any rights from the Constitution. The Constitution is there to protect your rights, to secure your rights, to give you the legal authority to say, you're violating my rights and here's the law that you've broken, so let's go and fix it. So we're dealing with, at this point, only infringements under color of law. What does that mean? Well, probably the first and most obvious is, well, when you're dealing with law enforcement. If law enforcement violates your rights and they're found to have done so illegitimately, in other words, it's not a question of taking you under arrest. It's not a violation of your rights because you're being charged with violating rights, right? But you're also dealing with governors who say, well, your business has to shut down. In fact, I'd go so far to say governors and legislatures say that you can't do your job unless you get our permission. You want to cut hair? Oh, you need a license. I had to get a license to start the Constitution study business so that I could collect sales tax to be legal within the state of Tennessee. What right does the state of Tennessee say I need their permission to conduct business? Now, they have the authority to collect taxes, and I have no problem registering with the state and saying, yes, I'm going to collect sales taxes for you. Here's who I am. Here's how, and I'll do my reporting. And that's not my issue. The issue is when they say, no, you have to pay a tax and get a license in order to be considered legitimate to actually register to pay sales taxes. Well, dealing with rights and liberties that are protected by the Constitution or the laws of the United States. But again, those have to be legitimate laws, meaning they were made pursuant to the Constitution. So this really wouldn't help for all those illegal, unconstitutional laws that Congress passes day in and day out. But then again, we don't pay attention to the Constitution much anyway at this point, right? But here's what I find interesting. Fined or imprisoned. Look at how often that if you violate this, a person will be fined or imprisoned. Now, there's a couple things we need to look at really closely there. First of all, the courts have regularly recognized what's called a special immunity, a limited immunity. And the idea is this: if you're a government agent and you are in good faith doing what you think is your job, governor passes a law that says people can't be out, and you in good faith arrest someone for being out in violation of the law, well, if the person sues and wins, it is not you individually who are fined, it's the government. That as a law enforcement officer, pretty much any government agent has a certain spot of immunity where the punishment isn't taken by the person, but by the government. And I have a problem with that. Now, it's one thing to say, you know what, if government passes a law, if a legislature passes a law and it is unconstitutional and it does me harm and I sue the government over that, then the government should pay. But if a person's a law enforcement officer and violates their oath of office, infringes on a person's rights under color of law, why is it the police department that pays and not the individual? Now, the police department may have some level of culpability, right, if they train that officer to do that. But in general, this is it's a way of protecting government officials, which means since they have no real consequences, they have no reason to even consider, are they violating your rights? Take, for example, let's say an overeager Child Protective Services agent. because I've seen these stories. I haven't seen much of them lately, but I've seen these fairly regularly where, in fact, actually somebody was talking to me on one of the comment pages about someone was accused and CPS took their children away, and then they were found not guilty, and CPS not returning the children. So here you have a violation under color of law. CPS is acting under the color of law, and they violated the rights and yet both under the protected under the Constitution and under U.S. law of this individual. Now, if the CPS policy is at issue, okay, but what about the individual? What about the caseworker who is violating the rights of this person? What about the sheriff's deputy or the police officer that violates the rights of an individual under color of law? The courts, again, I don't believe Congress, I don't believe the legislatures, the courts have decided that the individual is not liable. And that, to me, is a problem. Because that puts everyone in government. If you get a government paycheck, you have a level of immunity that no one else has. If you or I go out and make an invalid citizen's arrest, we can be sued. And if we lose, we pay the penalty. But we have a law enforcement officer who the only real difference is they get a government paycheck, illegally arrest somebody, and they get sued and they lose. It's the police department. It's the taxpayer. It's you and me who pay for that person's misdeed. There is no real incentive other than, oh, maybe they get, they get a reprimand. At worst, maybe they lose their job. Right? That's creating an aristocracy. There is a level of people with greater protection than everybody else. And here's the other problem. Again, not so much with the law. I have no problem with the law so much, but the way we've implemented it. So let's say that someone under color of law infringes on your right, as is happening daily at this point, and you go to court. What court are you going to? See, you're going to be heard in a government court. And the people, with the exception of your representative, all work for the government. Now, which government? Well, if you are dealing with a state order and you sue them in state court, then the judge works for the state government. The prosecutor, the defense attorney works for the state government. And unless you got a lot of money, possibly, you've got to have a lawyer. That's the only person there besides you that doesn't work for that state government. Oh, but we'll sue them in federal court. Yeah. Which is a federal court where the judge and the lawyers all work for the federal government, except maybe you're a lawyer. Do you see how the deck is stacked against you? No, don't get me wrong. We need courts. And we need them to be as independent as possible. The problem is we've allowed courts to become, if not political, government focused. They give the benefit of doubt to the government when they should be giving the benefit of the doubt to the individual. They should be protecting the rights of all involved. We want to be absolutely accurate. They should look at this and be protecting the rights of all involved, but we have courts that are deferential to government. And the perfect example is this idea of compelling governmental interest. The video I did earlier this week, I talked a little bit about compelling government interest and the fact that nothing in the Constitution says your rights will be protected unless there's a compelling government interest. In fact, the only legitimate compelling government interest I can think of comes from the Declaration of Independence and the requirement that the government protect your rights. But you see, when courts stop doing this, the people who hold them accountable, our representatives, well, they have no real incentive to chastise the court because they work for the same government as the court. So when the court says the government can do whatever it wants to do, guess what? Your legislature has no real reason to say, no, that's a bad decision. You shouldn't let me do whatever I want. Because the only people that would hold that representative accountable, we the people, don't. We've spent 150 years letting the government do whatever it pleases. So when you see a law like this, it sounds good, but in all practicality, you're going to a government court to accuse the government of bad action and ask the government to punish the government for what it did. And in many cases, the government that you're suing is the same one that's employing the court. So 18 U.S.C. 242 sounds great, and I'm all for it. I have no problem with that law. The idea that if a state or local entity violates your rights, notice it doesn't talk about the federal government, it's just states and local entities, then they should be held accountable. And in fact, the individuals should be fined or imprisoned. But this is back to a problem with the courts. Until we get our courts in order, laws mean whatever the judge wants them to mean. Oh, don't believe me? Look up the definition of case law. It is law determined by judicial opinion. That's not law, but we treat it as law. But our courts are out of control because our legislatures are out of control. And our legislatures are out of control because we keep hiring people who ignore the law and do whatever they darn well please, and then expect us to vote for them again. Well, if recent history should teach us anything, it is time that we, the people, get control of our creations again. That creation includes the state government, the local government, and the federal government. And if you want anything to change, we, the people, are going to have to do it. Now, some of you may be thinking I'm talking about a war. What I'm really talking about is a ballot box. You see, if our representatives were more worried that if they didn't reprimand an out-of-control court, they would lose their jobs, maybe we'd get the courts under control. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, but it's not going to happen until you and I start making it happen. So there it is, 18 U.S.C. 242. It's one of those laws, hey, it's a great, as it stands, it's a good law. But until it's enforced, until we get the courts to actually implement what it says, to actually decide based on what the law actually says, not what some judge came up with, well, then it's just words on paper. And it won't mean anything until we hold accountable those who are our agents, those who are working for us, to actually do their job and say, when a court violates the law, when an officer of the court, a judge, violates the law, it is up to the Congress or to the legislature to impeach and punish that individual. And until we start doing that, why bother? And until we start doing that, things are not going to change. So sorry I couldn't tell you that it's a magic fix-all, but it is what it is. Hopefully I gave you some good information, and hopefully you found it worthy to come back next time for the Constitution study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday